Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Not Just Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Dominic de Moura McCarthy, and today's episode is a very special episode because it's a new collaboration between PAYA, the Pacific Australia Youth Association, and the Not Just Leadership podcast. So for those who don't know, I am the founder and president of PAYA, and the PAYA board has asked me to do a once-a-month podcast collaboration to cross-share this podcast. And so I'm really excited to welcome today's guest. Today's guest is Iliganoa Feagaimaalii Soti, better known as Nai. I hope the pronunciation was okay. I've been practicing. And Nai is Miss Samoa for 2025 to 2026. She's a youth advocate, leader in the communications and digital space, the chief communications officer at PAYA, and she's been very active in her work with the Samoa Tourism Authority and a range of regional youth initiatives focusing on empowering young people, promoting the Samoan culture, and strengthening the youth participation across the Pacific. So Nai, could you please give our listeners and the PAYA audience a little bit of introduction to yourself and your background?
Yes, Flava Norm Pacific greetings. Again, Talofa, Dominic, and thank you so much for having me on today. For everybody listening, Iliganoa Feagaimaalii Soti, might I say you did really well in pronouncing my very difficult Samoan name there. Nai for short. I'm 24 years old from the beautiful islands of Samoa. I'm working with PAYA as the Chief Communications Officer and also serving as Miss Samoa 25 to 2026. I'm very passionate about youth, particularly sort of youth development here in the Pacific, in Samoa and throughout the Pacific Islands. I've traveled all across the Pacific representing Samoa and the voices of young Pacifica people throughout. And so those are just some of the areas that I'm focused on. My advocacies is on education, on climate resilience, on youth development, amongst many other things. So I'm very privileged to be here and to, of course, have this platform to talanoa and share a bit about my purpose and my why.
Yeah, wonderful, Nai. And I'm curious to hear a little bit more about your, childhood growing up in Samoa, and what were the kind of key experiences that shaped your values and influenced you growing up there?
Yeah, of course. For me, I obviously was born and raised here in Samoa. It's in particular a rural area in Samoa. So I grew up and was raised in Savaii, is the bigger island here. And so all my life, my education and my upbringing was all here in Samoa locally up until my tertiary education. I was given the opportunity to go study overseas in Australia. But life here in Samoa, it's simple, quite simple, but I love it. And it's very fulfilling in a way to be able to come back and serve the community here in Samoa and throughout the Pacific. Some of the sort of common values that you'll find that guides a lot of the work that we do is obviously service in Samoa. That's called tautua. And fa'aloalo, which is respect, and alofa, which is love. And so, growing up, these are all the things that I was brought up with and I was taught from a very young age. And as I get older, I've become sort of to realize how important that is. But also, growing up and being born in a rural area, I've come also to realize some of the challenges that we face, but more in particular, the sort of rural coastal areas and with the vulnerable communities out there, and sort of looking at how limited resources are and access more so. That's one of the things that I've realized, something that's very, very important for us to have here. And so, one of the key areas that we look at advocating for and finding solutions for.
Yeah, amazing. And I guess some of those values that you mentioned that still anchor you today, how do you think they also kind of connect to leadership? Because you talked about service, family, faith, and, staying grounded and connected with your culture. How has that kind of influenced your leadership style or your approach to leadership?
Absolutely. In Samoa, there's a proverb that goes as a little something like this. O le ala I le pule o le tautua, which directly translates to the the pathway to leadership is through service. That's sort of the translation I can come up with on the spot, but that's basically what it is. And in Samoa and throughout the Pacific, that's the understanding and the belief that we hold, is that to lead is to be of service, and that's what leadership means here in where I am and where I grew up, and sort of the values, and to lead as well, as I've mentioned, and with the values that we guide, that have guided sort of the work that we do, and even with my ancestors, and that those values of love and respect, those are values that I believe should be inherent into any leader, and should be instilled within any leader. All the work and every work that any leader should do should be guided and anchored and grounded by the love and respect that they have for the people. And, even in today's world, I believe we need leadership and leaders who have compassion. And again, those are all the values that, very fortunate that aligns with also PAYA's values as well, with the work that PAYA does across the Pacific. And, just setting that example of what leadership means. And so again, as you've mentioned, Pacific values, Samoan values, grounds and anchors the work that I do, but all in the heart for my people, and love and respect for my people.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And can you share a little bit about your journey to Australia to study your degree in South Australia through the Australia Awards Scholarship? Kind of what was that process? You obviously would have gone through an application process, rigorous, competitive, prestigious scholarship. And then what was the process like of, I guess, thinking about going to Australia, then applying to go, then being accepted, and then actually, going and arriving and undertaking your studies there? Can you share a little bit about that kind of journey?
Yeah, I love sharing about this journey. Simply because it's always such a competitive process, and it's such a big deal here in the islands. And so, like you mentioned, I'm an Australian Awards scholar as well. I was able to go to Australia and study through the Australian Awards Scholarship. So it's a full ride scholarship. And again, as I said, very competitive. And from thousands of students that you have within a year, only a few are chosen within a cohort. And so at times there are about, it really varies, but you're looking at about 5 to 10, students who get the scholarship at the end of the year. And so for me, I had always dreamt of studying in Australia. It was always the ideal study destination for me for my tertiary education. And there was definitely a lot of hard work that went into it. I understood what I wanted and where I wanted to go, and then obviously worked really hard towards that. I was very fortunate, blessed to have been able to achieve it, but wouldn't have done it obviously without the support of my family and sort of the value of education that my parents had instilled in me from a very young age. And just, with the scholarship as well, I guess the process, we go to college and then we go through what we call a foundation year. This is just in Samoa, by the way. And with the foundation year, that's sort of like a pathway into university type of thing. And it's, in Samoa at least, it's known for the year where you basically vie for scholarships. And so the foundation year, that's what that basically was for, is for us to work really hard to try and get a scholarship. And so did foundation year, had gotten the scholarship, and then I decided on two universities. There were two universities that I wanted to go to. One was ANU, and then the other was Adelaide University, the University of Adelaide, now Adelaide University. But ANU had stopped taking in scholarship students my year. So then I had my next best option, and it couldn't have worked any better for me, because that I feel that was where I was meant to be. very quiet, sort of low-key city. Some might call it like the sort of countryside. But I loved it. And, the experience for me, I'm very grateful for DFAT and the Australian government, and of course the Samoan government for all their support throughout my education, and then of course Adelaide Uni as well. I had received such tremendous support, and then transitioning also into uni was just amazing. I did so much during my uni days. I was a student support officer, student ambassador at UOA, and, had those experiences that really added a lot of value to my student experience. And yeah, so very blessed.
Yeah, that's an incredible journey. And I guess also some of the difficulty can be for Australia Award scholars, and also as Australians like myself who've studied overseas and coming back home, is once you go back home is kind of readjusting to life again and finding your career and your, where your calling is. So then going back to Samoa, what kind of professional career did you start to pursue, and kind of what was that transition like to go back home?
Yeah, it was quite interesting. When I got back home, I think I got back home in January that year, just 2024. And I was sorting out, sort of figuring out what I was going to do in terms of career pathways. And I had a couple of options and had a couple of job offers that came in the one, like sort of that one, it all came in the 1 week. And I just had to quickly make a decision. Okay, what am I going to do with myself and with my life? And I sort of just prayed about it and just leaned in on my why and my purpose and what I wanted, what impact I wanted to have. And even now and even back then, I felt that I wanted to work within the youth space. I wanted a platform. I wanted a space where I can work directly with young people. And so I had these job offers, but then I had also received a job offer from the National University of Samoa to teach. Had never thought to teach ever in my life. It was never part of the plan to be an educator or to be an academic. But when the opportunity presented itself to me, it just felt right. For me at the time in this season of my life and what I wanted to do. And I felt there was no better place to reach young people, to work with young people, to mentor young people than within the classroom. And then, yes, that's sort of how I decided to do that and decided to take on the role of being a lecturer at NUS. And I have to say it's probably some of the best decisions I've made, and, just the most fulfilling role to have working with young people. There is so much potential. There's so much enthusiasm that, I'm constantly inspired when I'm around them, and I was around them every single day. So, yes, that's what the transition was like for me.
Yeah, that's excellent. And you've, since been elected Miss Samoa for 2025, 2026. Can you share a little bit about like what that looks like representing Samoa on, the national, international stage? You're doing a lot of community engagements, a lot of public engagements, and also, I guess, how that's kind of contributed to your work in leadership or your perspective on leadership.
Being Miss Samoa is a privilege more than anything, really. It's such an extremely influential role, but it's so much responsibility as well. And I feel that a lot of people tend to underestimate the role in terms of the representation. For me, I've found that through my experience, there's so much pressure to perform, to show up in a certain way. And although, with the challenges as well and considering the expectations, I feel privileged more than anything to be able to represent my country, my people and my communities on within the national, regional, and of course the international stage. With the engagements as well and through leadership, I've learned a lot being Miss Samoa. Some of the best things that have come out of being Miss Samoa is being amongst the people. And I get asked often, what's your favorite part of the role? And I always say it's the people. Like that's definitely the best part about it is learning from their wisdom, being able to sort of get a sense of their experiences in many different facets, and going out into the community, connecting with them and learning from them more so is and has been such a pleasure for me as Miss Samoa, and as a Tamaitai Samoa, as a young Samoan woman as well. But also it's with that and through those experiences, it's really developed me as a person, sort of expanded my knowledge of the experiences that people are having within the communities, and then also work with them to understand how we can find solutions for a lot of the challenges that they're facing. And so even with, project management, that's also, such a big skill set, I guess you could say, that I've gained from being Miss Samoa. You're engaged in a lot of, projects, and you're, with me as well, I've been fortunate enough to have been given the opportunity to develop my own initiatives and work towards it as well. And so developing those skill sets, connecting with the people, being able to understand their experiences and put myself in their shoes, and to better cater solutions to the communities. And so, really localizing a lot of the frameworks and a lot of the global frameworks as well that we often talk about and we know a lot about, but really bringing that down to the community level, and understanding where we can apply those to really help them and be able to make a difference. And yes, I guess that's sort of it.
Yeah, I love how it's a role that you can kind of be out in the community each and every day and kind of keep that connection, even though you have that high level representation and that senior kind of position. And when we watch your videos now and we watch your engagements, you have a great confidence and, a real, you have a great confidence when you speak and you're really comfortable from what we can see. How does that look like behind the scenes? Is there a particular moment where you really found that confidence during your leadership or personal journey? Is it something that you've just been continuing to develop? Is it something that more comes naturally to you? Can you share a little bit about your confidence and, public speaking and leadership?
Yes. Well, first off, thank you. It's not, I'll admit, it's not all the time that I feel confident, but I believe that it's a skill. And like any other skill, it's something that you build up over time and you work towards, you practice. And even with public speaking, it's just like public speaking. If you do it enough times, you start to pick up how well to do it, and of course what works for you. And so for me, from a very young age, I've always sort of been put sort of in the spotlight, I guess, in a sense. I've been pushed beyond my limits from a very young age, and my parents would encourage me to do things out of my comfort zone, and it's the only way I feel to build confidence. I feel sort of like when insecurity or not being sure about yourself in any area comes from a lack of knowledge in that particular area, or a lack of practice within those areas. And so your confidence comes through when you are knowledgeable, when you are well practiced, when you are well informed about different topics. But at the same time, you don't always necessarily have to be well informed about things, because there are times where, and often in this role actually, I'd say there's a lot of times where you are thrown in the deep end, you have no idea what you're doing, and you just have to come up with things on the spot. But it's very important to recognize your worth at the same time, that you need, even if you're not sure about yourself, don't show it to other people that you're not sure about yourself. It's very important that you recognize your strengths, and you recognize that, like I said, your worth as a person, and that your knowledge and the skills that you've built over time can all be utilized in whatever area, really. But it's also very important as well to keep developing that knowledge and to keep learning. I'm an avid learner, and I feel that that's where some of the confidence comes in, is constantly learning and constantly, building my knowledge on different things and understanding different things. But at the same time as well, it's just finding peace in who you are as a person, and knowing that for a lot of people, and I've spoken about this as well to my students when I was teaching, is that a lot of the times people aren't confident because they're conscious of what other people might say. And I always say that you'll be judged regardless. It doesn't matter what you do in what capacity. There will always be somebody that may have sort of a negative opinion about who you are and what you say. And so at the end of the day, that's none of your business. Like, it doesn't affect who you are, and it just says more about others than it says about you. And so, it's just things like that you learn over time. But again, learn more, practice more, know your worth, and yeah.
Yeah, that's excellent. I love that. I want to kind of maybe more of a philosophical question. I know you studied philosophy actually, but essentially leadership means different things to different people. So how would you describe leadership for you, and what does that mean to you now?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. I think, leadership for me would yeah, and even with philosophy, there's something that I feel is very it's not explored as much, but Pacific philosophies and Pacifica philosophies, like, for example, the va and the relational space between people, is something that is very crucial to building Pacific relationships and even within Pacific leadership. And so for me, what leadership means for me is really service. And I think that's the one word that could describe leadership for me, is that at the end of the day, regardless of the position that you hold, you are a leader to be of service to others, and to be that leader and to be of service, there also needs to be some form of accountability as well. And within Pacific philosophy, and within Pacific leadership and understandings of Pacific leadership, these are all things that that as I mentioned with the VAR, there are different types of VAR, different types of relational spaces, VAR Fealoai, and many other things. But one of the key things that guides the VAR, and where people then respect the VAR, is what we call a whiangainga. Now, whiangainga is covenant. In English, and the covenant between people in Pacific leadership philosophy is very important, in the way that it's almost as if, I guess I'd liken it to pinky promise, but a pinky promise that you cannot break. I guess you'd say, like a pinky promise, cross my heart type of thing. But the covenant is very important in leadership, in that, when you become a leader, you then have this covenant with the people that you are of service to. And so for me, that's what leadership means for me, is to be of service and to respect the relational space and the covenant, and to be reminded that there is a covenant that you have with the people that you serve. So yes, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. That's a very kind of deep explanation. I appreciate that. I guess for our young audience out there across the Pacific and, across the PAYA network, there are a lot of them are, pursuing opportunities to go into leadership, to make change, to be active role models in their communities. What do you see, the role and responsibility of young people in the Pacific that we have, and what can you say to them to kind of encourage and guide them in their journey?
Yes, for our young people across the Pacific, it's quite interesting and it's, very encouraging as well to see the rise in Pacific youth leaders across the region, and even in Australia and across Oceania, and how amazing our young people are, the potential that they have, and how outspoken they are about all these issues that are affecting them. Um, for me, just looking across the board as well, we often see, and I personally often witness how young people feel they can only make an impact on the regional or global stage, and they often bring up recognizing their voice in that way. But I also want to remind our youth that we often underestimate how local action can greatly impact the national, global, and of course global dialogue conversations and frameworks as well. And so, I guess my encouragement and reminder for the young people is that you don't need to start big. You can start small within your village, within your family, within your community. That's really where you should be starting anyway. And then grow your way from there. But again, I feel that the most impact you can make is within the local community, wherever you are in the Pacific. Make an impact within your community, and then you'll realize that, and you'll soon realize then you'll be sort of recognized in the national, regional, and therefore global stage as well. But the most impact you can make at this stage of your life is to start small from within the home, from within the village, and locally as well. So
Yeah, I love that reflection. And I think that's so important to keep in mind because you can see these big announcements, these big global forums, these
yeah,
treaties, these agreements, these statements. And then you kind of think, okay, well, what does that look like back at home for me? And sometimes it feels like there's a disconnect. And I think that's our responsibility as young people is to be that kind of anchor in the local community. For me, volunteering just started out, volunteering at my local church on the weekend here in
yeah,
Queensland. And then, volunteering at the local community fun run. And then, those kinds of experiences that you
yeah.
start to build that
I love
local
that.
connection. Yeah. And then you expand and, you start to volunteer, you deliver workshops and then you go overseas and then you go to a conference. And so, yeah, I like that you said it's kind of step by step and start small. And I think that's like applicable even in business, in education, all across all the areas in life is just starting locally and starting small and
Yeah.
taking time as well. Like PAYA, we
Yes.
started almost 6.5 years ago now. And I've been I've been the only person still volunteering for that time. We've had a lot of volunteers come and go and, people have their own other projects and other responsibilities in life. But for me, it's been something really rewarding to see the journey across such a long, quite a significant period of time now.
Yeah.
And just seeing the growth and doing things for the long term and doing things sustainably so that
Yes.
they can still function in 5, 10, 15, 20 years time. When you leave an organization, when you leave your local community to go abroad, things still run as they should because you took the time to build it slowly and, and build up the other people around you. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. Um, I guess can kind of start to wrap up the conversation. I guess, is there any final pieces of advice or wisdom you can share? You've said so much great, pieces of advice that we can take on. But yeah, just any kind of final message that you can share to our youth out there and just encourage them to, continue on their journey.
Yes. I think my last piece of advice would be to take every opportunity you get to learn. We really underestimate learning and how much you can learn from other people as well, and I understand that we must recognize the power of our youth, but I still believe that as young people we have a time and we have a place as well. And so in Samoa we have a proverb that goes o nei o tai ao. So it really, just to put it simply, is it's me today, it's you tomorrow. And so with that, I also want to highlight how important intergenerational learning is. There's so much wisdom, untapped wisdom that you can learn from your elders, from the people who have, done so much within different industries and within, with all the generations that have come before you, but and to really recognize that. And your time will come to lead, but at this point in our lives, I really believe in learning and take every opportunity to learn, develop yourself as a person, get educated. It doesn't have to be formal education. You can get education in so many different ways. Get engaged with the community. Get be involved and have extracurricular activities, volunteer, as you said. I feel that's something also that I believe in. I'm still volunteering as well, even with PAYA. So, I'm very privileged to do that. But in all that, there's so many important lessons that come out of that. And then, of course, just remember who you are, remember where you come from, and always be grounded in the values that I mentioned before. And that's so important to have as well as you grow and as you grow into your leadership journey as well. So, yes, I think that's it. But thank you so much, Dom.
That's a fitting way to finish. And thanks so much, everyone, for listening in. And we hope, this conversation encourages you to take action and, encourages you to just reflect more on how you can stay true to your values that Nai mentioned. I think, we're very blessed to have leaders, young leaders like Nai, leaders. I don't even have to say young because Nai's a leader. And we're very blessed to have leaders like Nai amongst our, community, amongst PAYA and, amongst the Pacific and Oceania. So, Nai, thank you so much for the conversation today. It's been a real blessing to speak with you and learn more about your journey and your values. And I'm sure the listeners would have loved the podcast as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Dom, and thank you to everyone listening. Wishing you all the very best on your journeys as well, wherever that takes you. Sending so much love.